Something that I'm guilty of is always like, how do I grow listenership? How do I grow more Google traffic? And very good at top of the funnel stuff. Like, how do I get more people into the Facebook group? And less good about, well, how do I just better serve the people who are already paying attention? And so maybe you don't need new traffic if you already have people paying attention to you.
Welcome to the Nickolas Natali Show. Nick Loper joins us today to talk about side hustles. Nick Loper is the chief side hustler at Side Hustle Nation. Nick's mission is to help folks find a side hustle that can generate income outside of their day job without burning themselves out, having to work 24/7. That's too much. Side hustles are supposed to be fun. He had the fancy corporate job, but since then he's ditched that and he's been building some websites. He's writing some books. He's worked in far corners of the globe and has coached new and seasoned entrepreneurs alike. Riddle of the week: what's the best way to watch a fly fishing tournament? Stay tuned to the end of the episode to find out. Let's jump into the interview. Hello and welcome to the Nickolas Natali Show. I'm your host, Nickolas Natali. Today we have a very special guest, Nick Loper. Nick, welcome to the show.
Oh my goodness, thanks for having me.
I'm happy you're here. I'm not going to waste any time here. I'm going to dive right into the meat. This is what I got on you. This is the dirty deets I have. While attending the University of Washington, you struck gold with a house painting internship. Go Ducks.
Oh gosh,
That internship gave you the entrepreneurial bug. What lesson did you take away? And I also think at the end of that internship, you read a blog and they're like, I think we just ruined your life. Tell me some more of that.
Oh yeah, gosh, super formative experience for young, impressionable youth. This gal comes into my intro to stats class and she's like, do you want a summer internship where you're going to learn entrepreneurship and sales and marketing and customer service and hiring? Dang, yeah, that checks all the boxes. And oh, by the way, you can earn an average of $7,000 a month or something. It's like as a college student or $7,000 over the course of the summer. I was like, yeah, I'm listening. And what they don't tell you until you're several steps deep into the interview process is that it's painting houses. And by that time, you're kind of bought in. You're like, I remember talking to my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. Is this a pyramid scheme? Is this a scam? What's... And she's like, dude, it's 3 months of your life. So what if it sucks? It's not life threatening. And I really appreciated that advice. What do you have to lose? Roll the dice, see what happens. And it turned out to be a super stressful time, but also super rewarding. It was the first time of really having that level of responsibility on your shoulders to make sure you're taking care of people's houses, running a crew of workers and managing the whole timing and schedule of all these different jobs and having to manage the margins at the end of the day. So it was really cool.
I heard you also had to do some hiring and firing during that portion. How did that feel in college?
I mean, it felt a little weird to be hiring friends and sometimes people who were older than me, but it's it's kind of, they had the whole process laid out. This is what you got to do. I painted more than I should have and painted a lot more than my peers. Their whole shtick was you're not supposed to be the painter. You're supposed to be the manager. You're supposed to be out selling the next job. But I had some self-doubt and underbid a lot of projects. I was okay, I got to step in here and help out. Otherwise, we're not going to get this done. But it was really cool. And to your point about we ruined your life, it was, if you made it this far through the summer, you're probably not going to be able to work for somebody else. You've seen the light, you've seen the Matrix, right? You've seen what it's like to work for profits and not wages. You've seen what it's like to work for yourself and call the shots. And it's going to be hard to go back. And they were 100% right about that.
That's pretty awesome. I feel like they have a keen eye for realizing some of those things. That reminds me of an experience I had. My first job, my first 9-to-5 job, I ended up starting an internship program for my alma mater. And when I went back, the dean of engineering said in passing to my manager at the time, was I'm surprised Nick stayed at your company so long. I always thought he would go off and do on his own. And then sure enough, 3 months later, I did quit. And I was like, man, you just told him, you showed him all my cards.
Yeah, you get the scouting report on you.
I know. It was pretty funny. I want to get into some more meat on the bones here. This is what I found. You jumped ship from Ford Motors to go all in on Shoe Sniper, which is an incredible name. I don't know why anybody hasn't brought that up. That is a great domain name, a website for creating or for comparing different prices of shoes. And then you went on to create virtual assistant.com. And I have listed here that you've been on the short end of over $10,000 worth of outsourcing mistakes. Can you walk me through some of those outsourcing mistakes?
The shoe business was like the original side hustle. Like this was the vehicle that let me quit my job. I kind of naively thought I could just be the dude who sells shoes on the internet. Like that could be my thing. Like a lot of businesses, had a ton of ups and downs and was very fragile in that it relied on relatively few sources of traffic and had relatively few affiliate partners to send that traffic to. So great while it lasted, like super grateful for that, but like had this finite lifespan and kind of a roller coaster ride along the way. On the side from that, started a bunch of different projects, one of which was the virtual assistant site. I started in 2011 and sold in 2020. And the other one was the Side Hustle Nation project, started in 2013.
Nice.
But the VA site was born as a side hustle from the shoe business out of my own questions and curiosity and trials and tribulations on hiring virtual help. Like we lived near this local community college at the time. And like I'm reading all the business books. It says I'm supposed to work on my business and not in it. Okay, so I got to hire some help. I don't necessarily want somebody coming over to like work at the kitchen table. This is like the early days of remote work, virtual assistants. Like, how is this really going to fly? Especially with all of these overseas companies, like, are they legit? Are they going to steal my ideas? How does this all work? How does it work with taxes? Like all of these different questions in trying to build out this directory of outsourcing companies. And it was a ton of fun to kind of be relatively early in that industry and learn all the different players and watch as it growed and matured over the next 9 years.
I feel like I was first introduced, and maybe that's the same time frame. I feel like the 4-hour work week came out and it was like so pro virtual assistant that it put that kind of model on the map. Was that around the similar time frame that you were getting into those kinds of things?
Yeah. So I think 4-hour work week comes out in 2007. Thomas Friedman, World is Flat, probably 2004, 2005 timeframe. There's definitely a rise in like the BPO industry, business process outsourcing. And for Fortune 500 companies, they were, ahead of the curve, like, oh, we can cut costs. But like for at the small business owner and individual owner level, it like wasn't quite mainstream yet. And Tim makes it sound super easy. Oh yeah, I just have this virtual assistant, like do all this stuff for me. What I found is you got to kind of build that system and process. And for me, a lot of the stuff was kind of, it was in my head and it was frustrating early on. Well, like, dude, why aren't they getting it? And it's like, well, first of all, they're half a world away. You've been doing it for 3 or 4 years, day in and day out. There's going to be a little bit of a ramp up period. But what was really rewarding was you getting some of the feedback and questioning. Like, I know you said to do it this way, but have you considered using this tool, or have you considered doing? Like, no. I've been heads down, like doing the thing. Like that's actually way better. Like, can you update the process? Like, yeah, do it your way. That's totally fine. In the development or like the redevelopment for the shoe site was where some of the most expensive mistakes came through in hiring the wrong team, or companies that overpromised and severely underdelivered. And it was this lesson in, I don't even know what you could do differently. It's like just set up tighter milestones, and if they don't hit, like cut losses early and often versus continue to string it out for months and months. And it's just super frustrating, super expensive. I mean, that's like any software project. Like it's going to take twice as long, it costs twice as much. It still sucks.
I can relate to that. And I feel like some of it also is the language comprehension too. Like this English might be their second or third language. That's happened to me a few times where I'm like trying to explain something and I'm like, we're definitely not understanding one another. Yeah. And it's probably me. Another to your point is like hiring the wrong person. I haven't had a giant mistake, or I shouldn't say mistake, like a really expensive VA mistake. Like the most costly one was I hired somebody, it was like $150. And they were just like, hey, this project is stressing me out and it's hard on my mental health. And they hadn't even started. And then they just sent the invoice. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Like what?
This is horrible. And then they hit me up like 6 months later because I went through a VA site to hire them. And the VA site was like, you never paid this person? I did. And I had to like filter through all my invoices. I was like, this person came back twice for this? I'm like, man, there's like a level of caution, but also like the level of quickness to find the balance of like training them up, finding them and all that stuff. It's an art.
On the positive side, like I've met some incredible people that I've never met in person that have been part of the businesses for years. And it is incredible. Like the access to talent and the access for people to find work that they find helpful and enjoyable. It's really, really cool. I mean, one of my early hires was this gal in Macedonia. Because the country is so small, she ended up being one of the top freelancers on Upwork, in the entire country. And she got invited to these events, and like, it was really cool to be her lead client, and it was a ton of fun.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, you really do start to care for these people once they're on board and on the team. And I feel like that makes a difference, and they can tell and you can tell.
It was really interesting. Like during the interview, what she said to me? She said, "You seem legit. You seem like an okay guy."
So nice.
And that was like the first time that I realized, as much as I'm interviewing them, they're interviewing me. Yeah. And it was like, oh, like, because I'm coming from the perspective, of course I'm legit. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But it was so interesting to see, like, oh, they don't want to get scammed either. They're looking for a legit way to make money from home. And it was really eye-opening.
I love that. Mutually benefiting. And that's probably like rewarding too. Like, I am legit. Look at me. I'm
of course.
External validation. This is awesome.
I'm trying to sell some shoes here.
I'm the shoe sniper. Hey, what's going on? It's Nick. Many folks inquire how they can support the podcast. You can do so by leaving a 5-star review on the platform you're listening on. That's always a good way to go. It goes a long way, and it's free. Or you can subscribe to our Patreon to have access to early released episodes at patreon.com/Nickolas Natali. Wanted to answer that quick FAQ for you. All right, back to the episode. All right, let's transition into the side hustle, the steps. This is what I got for you. There's the 3 C's or there's the 7 steps. I added a bonus one for you. I'll go ahead and list them, and you can tell me where you want to kick it off. 3 C's, creation, connection, and contribution. And then the 7 steps, we got make a chart with 3 columns, find the pain points, specialize, work your contacts, block out time, conduct periodic checkups, and then take cold showers. That last one's for you. So out of those 2 processes, wherever you'd like to kick us off for like the first step to getting a profitable side hustle started.
I think it makes sense to start with that intersection exercise where you're trying to identify what have you been paid to do, like your skills, experience. Like it could just be line items from your resume. It could be what you know how to do, problems that you've overcome in your past, and then trying to cross-reference that with what you enjoy doing. Because the last thing you need is a second job that you hate, or something that you come to dread doing. And then the third column is kind of like your network or your network's network. Like, who do you know? But maybe more importantly, like what type of people do you know, or who could you get introduced to? There's, shortcuts to all of those. None of these are like dead on requirements, but I think you find an easier time to get through that door. And really, you're trying to look for pain points, pains and problems. Is like, for me personally, that's what I spend money to make go away. Like, how can I smooth out the bumpy road of life? And that's what people tend to spend money on. And so I think if you can find a pain or a problem and then come up with a solution, it doesn't even have to be necessarily that different or innovative than what's already out there. That's the path that we see a lot of people taking to their first side hustle or their first business.
Yeah, I like that. And let's say I cook up an idea. I think there's something that I want to pursue. What would be some steps to validate the idea in the market to see if it's profitable, or if I was just, I'm just wrong. I was just wrong about this idea. I need a validation process.
You're right. Like, how can you validate it as quickly and as cheaply as possible? Mm-hmm. And you almost have to give yourself a tight deadline. Like, how am I going to prove this concept in 7 days, for less than $100, maybe? Like, because other than that, it's so open-ended. You're like, oh yeah, I'll get to it next month. This is the greatest idea, but it's like, it's too heavy for liftoffs. You almost have to like make it really tight. For the shoe business, like before ever having the site built, it was, just direct link text ads on Google. I think it's like the starting budget was like $1 a day. Like, hey, look, is anybody going to click on this stuff? Is anybody going to buy this? Is anybody going to buy this stuff? Like, super inexpensive and quick to kind of get that initial feedback. And today, like, what would be an example? I mean, before, committing to, renting out a venue could like you pre-sell tickets for a workshop or something. Before building out this website, could you get people to pay you, and not just like head nods? Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Like, okay, cool. Mm-hmm. It's $25. Here's the PayPal link. Just to try and prove it in a way that's real.
I think that's a great way to go about it. Hey, we're being honest here. I'll tell you a big mistake I made. The first thing I tried to do, in one of my previous side hustles of like, it was a podcast related service, but it was for like guest booking type things. And the first thing I did is I went with paid ads. I really wish I would have like asked around first, people in my network, exactly what you're saying, of do it at the low cost version. And then if it makes sense and makes money, then scale with like paid advertisements or something like that. That was a big mistake that I feel like I learned the hard way. And it was all around the idea of just validating the offer, the idea, which apparently is a more crucial step than I gave it credit for.
We had a guy who's a member of the Side Hustle Nation community, and he kind of shared this story about his son, trying to start this lawn care business, and he's going door to door, and he's offering to, mow people's lawns. If that person has lived there for any length of time, they have a solution for this. They either have a lawnmower in their garage or they have hired a service. It wasn't really resonating, wasn't really working. So he changed up his pitch to offer a lawn aeration service. Hey, when was the last time you had your lawn aerated? Oh gosh, it's been years, or if ever. And so he pre-sold all of these lawn aeration services, then goes to Home Depot to rent the machine. And it was like $200 or something for a Saturday, but knocked out $1,200 or $1,500 worth of work. It was like, that was a cool way to go about it.
Yeah, that's great. That's so good. And I like the thinking outside the box. And I like that there's the trial and error portion of it too, because part of me would think I would have done the first thing that he did, just go door to door until you sucker somebody into letting you mow their lawn, or give them a free mow so they'll be so impressed with your lawn cutting ability. But I think the air raid is a way better way to go.
Yeah, just a slight little pivot and specialized equipment. I don't know. I love stories like that.
I mean, we're blazing through this here. We validated the idea, and the next step is like kind of more operational. What do you think the operational side of this is in terms of, I think finding customers consistently is probably a big part of the side hustle continuation. Like we talk about making X amount per month, but in reality, it's like if you have a business that needs new customers each month, or fresh leads every time, do you have ideas about something along those lines?
Best framework that I found to think about this is Perry Marshall's tactical triangle, where he's got traffic, conversion, and economics as the three corners of the triangle. Traffic is like new leads, new customers, new people through the door. Conversion is like, well, how many of those people are going to buy my thing? And the economics is, well, how much does that thing cost? And in the center is obviously the fulfillment and execution of that. But he argues there's an 80-20 to all of these, and 20% of your efforts are going to account for 80% of your results. So it's really finding the thing that works for you. In my case, like something that I'm guilty of is always like, how do I grow listenership? How do I grow more Google traffic? And very good at top of the funnel stuff. Like, how do I get more people into the Facebook group? And less good about, well, how do I just better serve the people who are already paying attention? And so maybe you don't need new traffic if you already have people paying attention to you. And so there's different things like, how could you tweak the other corners of the triangle, the conversion and economic side of it, to do better there? But super dependent on whatever business model that you're in, which tactics are going to make the most sense. But we can go into different examples if you have anything in mind.
Let's go with a service-based business. And what's funny is during my research, I wanted to ask you this question about the strangest side hustle that you've encountered, because I've heard you answer the best side hustle you've seen, the worst side hustle you've seen. I'd love to know the strangest. And one of the ones that came up when I was researching for this was somebody was picking up dog poop in people's backyards and making money doing that. And it's really a good business, but it's also service based. And that's like one you would want to continue to find new people. So maybe let's go with that route. We don't have to use that example. It just came to my head, but let's go there.
Yeah, that was a really interesting episode, because it was, well, how'd you come up with that idea? And, she's like, well, I'm looking out in the backyard, kind of dreading this upcoming chore. And she's like, well, you know what? If it's a pain point for me, it's probably a pain point for other people. Next step, validation, goes on Google. Well, hey, look, there's already people offering this service in my town. Hey, look, they have Google reviews. They must have customers. I could set up a similar service, or a competing service. She just branded it really, really well. Bright pink signage. I think she ended up getting like a truck wrap eventually, like bright pink.
Gosh.
Erica Crouppin's Poopin' Scoopin' or something was like, and it was like fantastic branding. And she did a few things I thought were really innovative on the marketing side. Number one was inside different community Facebook groups, like an attention getting, picture of a dog pooping, and like stops the scroll, right? And she's like, hey, for $15 a week, like we'll take care of this problem for you. And what's cool is like, as long as you have that dog, like that's a recurring problem. Customer base was very sticky. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting one, where ultimately, like if you mind your margins, you could have other people go out and do this route for you. The other thing she did was set up a banner at the local dog park, like a bright pink canvas banner advertising the service, like hitting dog owners where they're at. And then she'd bring in donuts and business cards to the local vet offices. Like,
Oh,
hey,
that's
would you
so
mind if I
good.
stop by with donuts? Like, sure. Mind if I drop my business cards here too? Like
Yeah.
trying to get in front of those customers, like where they're already doing business, where they're all hanging out. And that's really what we've seen over and over again from different Side Hustle Show guests is kind of that marketing 101. It's like, how do I get in front of customers in their natural habitat? And that she had some really creative ways to do it.
In their watering hole where they're hanging out. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really good. I heard you give the example of a taco shop, like somebody that wants to open a taco shop, and there's other taco shops in the area and they've been around for a few years. They must be profitable and surviving. What are some metrics that you look for when doing competitor research? Because it's like, at some point, it's like, oh my gosh, all these taco shops, they're all doing well and they've been established for years. Do I want to get into this, even if it's my passion or whatever? Or it's like the reverse side of they're all profitable and I could find a way to snag a piece of that pie. What's your take on finding the right metrics doing competitor research?
Maybe there's room to come in and carve out some market share or serve a slightly different audience or, specialize in vegan tacos or something like there's probably an angle there that might make sense. So we had a guy who was doing website design, which is on the surface like a pretty commoditized business at this point. The internet's been around for 30 years. But what he did was like, I'm going to specialize in building websites for pressure washing companies. And not only that, I'm going to sell it instead of charging you $5,000 up front for this website, because I understand you're like a small business, maybe you're just getting started. I'm just going to charge you a couple $100 a month for the first 2 years. And I thought that was a really innovative way to go about it. Like, number one, the niche and specialization, because after a while, like, look, we got these handful of templates down. Like, it's not reinventing the wheel every time. Like, it gets faster and faster with each job that we do. We kind of like set it up for recurring revenue. Like, I've got pretty low upfront costs because of the systems that we built. And now I know I can count on that cash flow for the next 2 years instead of this, large upfront sum that might be cost prohibitive for a lot of companies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that goes back to the niching down. So when you're doing competitive research, it's not, let's look at all the taco shops. Let's look at my angle or positioning amongst these taco shops so I can actually have. I have a close friend that said something similar. It's like he hit his head against the wall forever until he finally chose a niche. A similar thing of making websites. He was hitting his head against the wall. Nobody wanted to work with him. And then he's like, I'm only going to make it for auto people in the auto space. And then suddenly he's the auto space website leader. And it's like,
he become the go-to guy for this one random niche. It's weird because the hesitancy is like, oh, I don't want to cut off the other 99.5% of potential clients. But by doing so, you'd almost build this perceived authority in whatever niche you chose. Maybe it's counterintuitive, but it's interesting that it works that way.
And I like that it works that way. Let's talk about when to scale. So what are indicators that your side hustle is ready to scale? And what's the first action that somebody should take when that phase is initiated?
Like, when you find yourself working 2 full-time jobs, that is probably a good indication. And if the side hustle is more fun, like, okay, that's what it was for me. Like, it became pretty tedious to go to work, and it almost felt like it was starting to cost me money. Like, I could see the direct impact of the effort I put into this online business, the shoe business at that time, to the bottom line, where with the day job wasn't getting that direct feedback to effort to reward. And so that's definitely an element where we see some people kind of making that leap from, how do I know when it's time to quit? Like, well, I would love to see you have a track record of revenue, or track record of profit rather, that exceeds your monthly expenses. Like, I don't want you to have to go into debt. I don't want you to have to go backwards, assuming you have a little bit of a runway or safety savings cushion. And then the other scenario is like, you may not be quite there yet, but you could see with an extra 40, 50 hours a week to dedicate to it, that you could get there and you can get beyond. Like, that's where the other people kind of say, okay, I'm going to take that leap. For full disclosure, there's other people who are like, nope, an entrepreneur is somebody who jumps off the cliff and figures out how to build the parachute on the way down. If that's your personality type, if you need to burn the ships, go for it. But don't tell anybody that Nick Loper told you to do that. That sounds stressful for me. As far as scale, though, I'm drawn toward the business models that kind of inherently have some scale built in, where, as you know, it takes the same effort to produce a podcast episode that 10 people listen to, or 10,000 people listen to, or 100,000 people listen to. And so I'm kind of drawn to those models that have this kind of natural built-in element of scale, create something once and benefit from it over and over again, and hopefully evergreen, especially website content, where if I can put this page up on the internet, it's going to require maintenance and upkeep and updating just to make sure it's accurate and still valuable. It can be relatively hands-off for sometimes months or even years at a time.
That's a great point too. I love the evergreen idea behind a lot of this creation things. And I think the direction I'm keeping my head in too, because why have to rework the wheel over and over if there's options available that don't require it? I think that's the way to go. I've heard you discuss like growing a business and mastering your time. And I know a big appeal for you of the side hustle is being able to have control over your schedule. What strategies do you have in place to manage your time effectively? And I'll provide some examples that I've heard, and maybe you can debunk them, or you can be like, they're right. One of them that I consistently hear is first half of your day, you should dedicate toward growing your business, bringing in more business. Second half of your day, you work on, your client's work or the other non-money making type stuff for your business. How do you structure your time?
Theory is always better than what actually happens in practice. But in theory, here's what I would like to have done. So every night I'm itemizing out my top priorities for the next day. And I'm using this, self-made journal, like this 3-question journal that I created. It focuses on what I get done today, what am I grateful for, and what are my top priorities for tomorrow? Like super simple, like 5-minute practice that lets me itemize out what did I accomplish today? Hopefully I did work that mattered. What am I grateful for? Let's take a pause. Like even if everything hit the fan, there was probably still something good that happened today. And then the important question for productivity tomorrow is that, okay, what are my top priorities? Like what am I going to get done? And hopefully start to make progress on those before diving into reactive mode, email mode, like just, responding to all the fires that you have to put out. And I found that super, super effective or super helpful versus just like, showing up at the desk. All right, let's do it. What do we got? What's the internet have in store for me today? That's a recipe just to, kill the first hour and a half of your day. Well, yesterday, Nick told me that this was the most important thing. So let me tackle that. That's been helpful. And then the other thing has been kind of batch processing a lot of the meetings, like try and stack up all the meetings on one day a week, just because I would find myself 15 minutes or 45 minutes before the next call, like, well, what am I really going to get done in that time? Yeah. So you kind of just dink around, and it was like very start and stop without a lot of deep work time. So to the extent that your schedule and work allows it, like trying to be really disciplined on when you take meetings just to free up those bigger blocks of time the rest of the week.
You're preaching right to me, Nick. These are all things that I need to hear. It's all those practices that I wish I was doing. This is something I've been considering stewing on. I've done it in the past and I thought it was really helpful. Like having allotted email time or administrative time once or twice a day and having it in the signature of your email saying like, this is when I check my emails. This is when you can expect a response. That's like the code I'm living by. If otherwise, don't expect to hear from me. Anything like that. Any like hard set in stone things.
That's like hardcore 4-hour work week. I only check email twice a day at this time. Yeah. And, I always smile when I see that in people's signatures. I'm guilty of having the inbox open almost throughout the day. And it's a habit that's just, it's a 10, 15 year habit. It's hard to break, even though I have at this point an assistant who theoretically is, triaging the most important messages and kind of filtering out the rest. I do really like this SaneBox email filtering tool. I think they do a pretty good job of determining what is important and what is less important. That helps. And I've got a really elaborate system of filters at this point too, to kind of route things to different folders.
I have 2 email extensions that I think are useful. One's called Sorry Not Sorry, if you've seen that. Like as you type out your emails, it'll tell you which of your words sound weak in tone, so you can remove them. Like you shouldn't say the word should or try, or in my opinion, it's like very like having strong emails. It's helpful in writing, I don't know, just a stronger tone. And then another one that I have that I don't use, which I feel like is telling of where I'm at, you can set it to pause your inbox until a certain time. So if you don't want to check your emails till 10 or 9 or whatever your time is, it'll pause it and then it'll have them all come so you can knock them out.
Okay.
But I don't set it up, Nick. I just let things come through anyway. And then I do exactly what we're talking about, just keeping them open and like responding when they happen.
It's a weird dopamine hit of like, it feels like this is effective. And, for a time I had a little sticky note on the side of the monitor. This, email is not your top priority. Just like almost you kind of need this visual reminder of like, look, you have actual work to do and this email probably isn't it. But it's hard because some of the stuff is important. Some of the stuff is advertising deals that come through or other partnerships, or it's weird how something super important and thousands of spam messages all come into the same place. And you're like, wow, we're supposed to filter this out.
It's painfully true. I got a question for you. And then I got a question around, this is a 2-for-1. I want to know what your revenue streams are. And then I also want to know, there's a debate out there. There's a debate that says you should focus on having one revenue stream that you grow. And then there's another half of the debate that's like, you should have multiple so you can have, you're not relying on one. What's your take on that? And then maybe we can dive into some of your different revenue streams.
General rule is simplify first, diversify second. And so if anybody is out there, chasing the old adage of, chase two rabbits, catch none kind of a thing, I think that really does apply if you're early on in the business. Like find one traffic source, one offer, one customer that works and go to town on that and worry about diversification second. Today, I did a post or an episode earlier in the year on like, here are my 17 income streams. And it's one of these almost clickbaity titles, like, really? And most of them are really small, like $100 a month or less. Yeah. But it's just like, well, how many can I stack up for this attention getting title? Yeah. A lot of them are driven through the traffic sources of the blog, of the podcast, of the email list, of the YouTube channel, like centered around that one ecosystem. And so it's not like I don't run 17 different businesses. Like that would be really challenging to do. In terms of, Side Hustle Nation's revenue streams, sponsorships on the podcast, affiliate partnerships through the website and email list, and my own products and services, mostly digital products, would be the third piece of the pie chart.
Those are all great to have in your toolbox, I'd say. As soon as a potential revenue stream becomes a distraction to the bread and butter, I feel like it's probably not as worthwhile in pursuit, or one thing has to be stable enough to where you can devote separate attention or effort to it. The saying of the wells, where it's talking about one well that's 6 feet deep versus 6 wells that's 1 inch deep, I think that's super true.
It's trying to like add on incremental revenue streams that make sense. Like in the example of the virtual assistant site, after the site was up and running, we had companies start to reach out about like, well, can I advertise on the site? Nobody ever asked that before. Let's figure out a package. Yeah, we can do this placement, or we can add this listing. And then we had years later another company reached out like, well, how on Yelp or TripAdvisor, it will say like, featured listing at the top. What would it take for you to put one of those and feature us at the top? And
nice.
Oh, okay, sure enough. We can figure out how to code that, or we can figure out how to do that. And so you're kind of stacking on incremental revenue streams that make sense. Like other ones we could have added would have been like a done for you hiring service, which a lot of other companies kind of do. Hey, we'll sort through and vet all these different candidates, and we'll present you the top 3 to interview for this flat fee. Other companies do that pretty well. So like if you can kind of start with one and then add on other things that make sense versus trying to pull in something that's completely out of left field. And usually it's in response to what customers or partners are asking for.
Such good advice, Nick. The adding on, I think sometimes people are like, I need a revenue stream that's in a different industry because then I can really diversify. And it's like, you can stack them up and it'd make more sense and probably make your life easier because you can streamline, you have the process in place for most of these things, like you mentioned, rather than going from medical products to motor products.
Yeah. And I mean, what I try to do is, obviously live below my means and, invest the difference and hopefully stack up, truly passive income in the form of investment gains and dividends and stuff like that.
Oh man, I cannot let this question pass me by. You had an exit. You exited from the virtual assistant. What was that process like of selling the site?
It was kind of cool. So a friend of mine, Dom Wells, runs a service called Onfolio. And today it's kind of a website holding company of sorts. And we had been back and forth for probably a few years. So he was somebody that I trusted in the space. He had this little button at the top that said, sell us your site or sell your site or something. So what happens if I click this thing just to explore this? Because the Side Hustle Nation project as it stands today is like super like personally branded, like it's got my mug on the cover. It would be harder to extract myself from. But this site was much less so. Like it still, was written by me and like in the first person and, it was my face on a lot of the videos on the site, but it was much less, this is me and you should follow me for all your virtual assistant needs. And so it was during the pandemic where, I had a pretty good routine for working on the site and the team that would come up with the articles and stuff for it. And that kind of got pulled back, or that transitioned into really, taking care of kids during pandemic time when their preschool was closed. And on top of that, I felt like I had taken it as far as I could, or as far as I really cared to, for the time that I had to invest to it in terms of the revenue and growth potential. And my fear was if I let it continue sitting in this state of semi-benign neglect, it's going to start to decline in terms of performance. And then all of a sudden the multiples that you could get for it in an exit would go down. Onfolio comes back and they had, I think at that time, first time website buyer, like investor program. And so the woman who bought it, was looking, her husband worked on these like high-end yachts as I want to say a chef, but maybe some other member of the crew.
Yeah.
And so they were traveling all over the world. And, she was just looking for a remote income stream. And like, hey,
Yeah.
I don't want to start something from scratch. I'd rather just, take something that's already working and then, work to expand that and grow that. And so they ended up buying the thing. And it was a relatively straightforward process. What I learned during it was like, keep better books, be super tight and organized on all this stuff. Because so much of it comes down to trust. Like, yeah, I can look at your Google Analytics and like, that's hard to fudge. What's the revenue attribution, especially if you're promoting the same company over here versus over here? Like all of that was a little bit commingled with other businesses. And so that would be my advice. If starting over, and of course, when you're starting the website, you don't know if it's going to become anything. And so you don't really care. You just kind of want to do what's easy and low friction, but it would have been better off at some point to really create it as its own entity.
Were there negotiations for the exit price? And also, I've heard it's different type of businesses and their models cause the exit price to be different. Like I hear software businesses, they can be valued higher because you're selling the software and the customers. Like it's both, you get both of those pieces. Whereas
and hopefully it's like predictable recurring revenue, like especially if those customers are on a subscription.
Yeah. And then an agency is like, it's valued not as high because it's like, what if we just poach your customers or something like that? But it's still toward the same of like recurring revenue, that sort of thing. What were the negotiations like, I guess?
Pretty straightforward. Like they came back with a valuation because there wasn't going to be a broker fee on it. I said, okay, I understand given the state of the market, I could probably get higher listing it on a brokerage, but then you're going to have a lot more tire kickers and you're going to pay a 15% brokerage fee. Yeah. So this was kind of like the low friction way to get it done. And especially like not having like airtight record keeping, for all this stuff. It was like, I feel like that's fair. And it was like not quite a 3x multiple on annual earnings, just in terms of, I don't know if the buyer would be fully comfortable saying like the actual purchase price, but it was earning around $5,000 a month when it sold and, on a slightly less than 3x multiple on annual earnings.
That's awesome. That's so incredible. Do you keep any of the like exit strategy in mind with your current projects? Even if it's Side Hustle Nation or anything like that?
It definitely opened my eyes that, okay, these are sellable assets. And especially like long term, that's kind of the option, right? You either keep doing it forever, you shut it down. And in doing so, you walk away from a ton of, goodwill and equity that you built up over the years, or you sell it for potentially a significant amount of money. And it's like, okay, if there are things that you can do today or things that you can kind of think long-term to make it a more sellable asset, then why wouldn't you go down that path? And the more existential question is like, what would you do next? And that's harder to answer. Some people were like, yeah, good riddance. I'm done with this. Like, I never liked this anyways. It's like, I think this is a fun niche to be a part of.
I had a friend who he made an exit and I guess somebody, or before he sold was like, okay, what do you want to do when you're done? He's like, oh, I'm going to go vacation. I'm going to go live on an island somewhere. And he's like, okay, great. So after those 2 weeks that you're on vacation, what are you going to come back and do? And he's like, oh, I have not thought of, did not think that far ahead. Just been dying to get out of his whatever his current situation was.
Yeah, you almost have to have something. I mean, you've probably seen the stories of people who, spend 40 years of their career at this company and then they retire and then they're like dead within a week because they got nothing. They got nothing like driving them forward anymore. You need some project to work on for sure.
Yeah, or some greater purpose fulfilling these business aspirations. Nick, do you have a mentor? Do you have somebody that's like giving you guidance in some of these business aspects? I know your grandfather was an entrepreneur, but is there anybody else that was in your life that helped get things going?
I was really grateful to have a bunch of virtual mentors early on. And I would bucket Pat Flynn under this category from Smart Passive Income, was early into his stuff. And it was his, free podcasting tutorial that, helped me learn how to set up the show in the first place. And still, every now and again, I'll send him like, hey, we just passed 25 million downloads. Thanks again. And he's just like, it's so cool. The spider effect of that one tutorial that he posted like late 2012 or something. So he was definitely an early mentor. The guys at the Tropical MBA podcast, been listening to them forever. Similar story, like from discovering, on-demand audio is a thing. And like, shoot, I kind of want to try my hand at this, like to create the show that I wanted to listen to. And so that was really helpful. And then have been a part of a bunch of different mastermind groups over the years, usually peer groups of other online business owners, just to talk shop, what's working in the world of, online media.
What's the biggest takeaway from one of those masterminds? Because I've heard nothing but great things. There's also a statistic out there of if you have somebody holding you accountable to your goals, you're 76% more likely to do them. And I feel like that's exactly what a mastermind is perfect for.
Yeah, I was always pretty self-motivated. And so I was really surprised by the fact of like, well, having to enumerate the stated goals to a group of peers and say, yeah, next time we meet, I'm going to have this, this, and this done. Nothing was going to happen. Like these are all self-imposed deadlines anyways. But just like that public accountability, a friend of mine, he just kind of like had what he called his accountability buddy, and they would have $100 on the line every week. If I don't get this done, I owe you $100. He's like, yeah, I've only had to pay, once or twice, but he's had to pay me like 5 times. And so
that's your side hustle, baby.
Yeah, there is something to that, kind of just making it known that this is what you're going to do. Otherwise, it's easy to kind of cut yourself some slack. I didn't sleep very well. It wasn't a great week. And helps kind of that continual practice of moving the ball forward on the things that are meaningful and important.
I've started setting up a bi-weekly, we call it a mastermind, but it's me and one other person, and we do exactly that. And it is just wild. I think that's so true. It's interesting though. I feel like there's conflicting studies all the time. I know there was a study that came out where it's like, you shouldn't tell people your goals because it sets off that dopamine in your head as if you already accomplished them. But then there's also like, I need somebody to hold me accountable. Like maybe if I was telling everyone in the world about my goals, I'd feel like I accomplished it for some reason, and set that off. But yeah, I think accountability is still very practical and good thing to keep in place.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that one. Like in your mind, you already checked this off because you made it public. I'm going to lose 50 pounds in the next 6 months. Somebody sees you 6 months later. What happened about that?
I just felt like I did it. I felt like I already got it. Nick, we are rapidly approaching the final question of the podcast. You made it. But before we do, I want to acknowledge you for all that you're doing. I think what you're pursuing is so honorable and noble. It's like giving people the access to have more freedom in their lives and pursue things they care about. And you're giving them the tools to do so. And on top of that, you're giving them a community of other people that are supporting these kinds of efforts. So I love it. I love the mission behind everything that you're doing. And I'm really grateful that you chose to spend some time with me on the pod and talk shop.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun, man. I love these conversations.
Perfect. The final question of the podcast is, what does it mean to live a fulfilling life?
What comes to mind is a combination of love, work, and progress, which is like your relationships, the people that you surround yourself with, the work that you're doing. Like, does this matter to you? Does this matter to others? And then progress is, pursuit of mastery. And you may never achieve it, but you have this kind of intangible thing that you're working on getting better at. And maybe it's golf, maybe it's podcasting. Like, it doesn't have to be business related. Something that you can see, measurable progress on, I think is really, really important for a satisfied existence.
I'm going to jot that down. I think that's a great answer. Nick, where can people connect with you on the internet? Where can they say hi? Where do you want to send them to? All the links are going to be in the show notes, so give them the goods.
Give them the goods. Would love to have you tune into the Side Hustle Show, available in your favorite podcast app. I will warn you, there are almost 600 episodes, which can be kind of daunting. So if you're not sure where to start, my recommendation is to hit up hustle.show, answer a few short multiple choice questions, and that'll build you a custom personalized playlist based on your answers that I think will be most relevant to you. SideHustleNation.com/ideas. This is my constantly updated list of different ways to make extra money that hopefully you have 6 or 10 different browser tabs open by the time you make your way down to the bottom of that one. But those are probably the best spots. Nick@SideHustleNation.com is my direct email. And would love to connect.
All those will be in the show notes. And go take that survey for the curated playlist. It's sweet. It's awesome. Definitely go check that out. Nick, thanks so much for being on the show.
Sweet. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. The real reason you're still here is you want to know the answer to the riddle of the week. And I don't blame you for that. It's a good riddle. But before I give you that, I want to remind you to share this episode with someone who's interested in starting a side hustle, who's got a side hustle, or anyone that you think just might enjoy this episode. All right, riddle of the week. What's the best way to watch a fly fishing tournament? Live stream. It makes the most sense, just from a technology point of view. Thank you for tuning in. I will see you next week, Fridays, 6 a.m. Bye.